I think we're on there now. Yeah.
Are we live? Okay, lift off. All right, so we're on. So hi everyone. I guess we're going to start by introducing everybody. So Harumi, maybe you go first. You were the first one on.
All right, gotcha. My name is Harumi Urata-Thompson, and I am the CEO and the co-founders of the company called Celestial Data. What the company does is basically it collects the data from microgravity environment as well as other parts of space, and basically utilize it for the science advancement here on the Earth. And how the blockchain comes into a picture is that because a lot of space programs are sponsored today by the government, it's not the sources are, some of the sources are free, some of the sources are a little bit complex to get to, and things like blockchain can actually clarify the data source, for lack of better words, in order to get the data to whom want to use the data, and also tokens can be utilized in the system to kind of settle the payment. So in a very big picture, we are a data company that works for the advancement of science, and in both in a reduction of the expenses that we have to pay to find, say, like a drug discovery and things like that on the Earth, as well as sometimes like accelerate the discovery process in the microgravity itself. So that's we're basically democratizing the space data, to use the sort of like a word that is very commonly used in the blockchain field.
Sam, you want to go next?
Sure. So, yeah, my name's Samuel Reid. I'm CEO of Geometric Energy Corporation and Geometric Space Corporation. I've previously been involved with some other companies working on various space and blockchain projects, like most notably IOTA Foundation. And I'm currently CTO of Canuck Industries as well, which is a company that's utilizing IOTA-based hardware for SATCOM and post-quantum secure data encryption that's auditable with a DLT. So there's a kind of interesting usage of kind of blockchain and space there in the application of SATCOM hardware that uses DLT integrated with it. And there's some other protocols and projects we're working on that should be able to help merge, secure communications and distributed ledger technologies and space, in particular satellite communications. It would be very interesting if, one day it got to the point of using blockchain and distributed ledger technologies for things like in-space activities or robotic control systems in space, or even propulsion or other kind of sensors being actuated maybe. But the kind of main thing in blockchain and space that I think is relevant right now is kind of like secure satellite communications, and as appropriate, having blockchain recording of that. So as well as maybe space resources. But yeah, Grant, maybe you can pass it off to you, and then we can further go into some projects we're working on maybe, or ask each other some questions.
Sure. So my name is Grant Blaisdell. I'm a co-founder of Copernic Space. A little quick background on myself and then some on Copernic Space. So I've been in the, let's say, the blockchain tech space formally for a little over 5 years. Originally got into it through digital media and a little bit from some activity I was already doing in the space industry. But that was very, very early, for any sort of real commercial application around aspects. Around the same time, I co-founded CoinFirm, which is a global leader in analytics and anti-money laundering for blockchain and crypto. And recently, it's become quite aware that times become right for something like Copernic Space, which is a blockchain infrastructure base that works around tokenization as well as a smart contract environment that provides a marketplace as well as a financing platform for what we call space digital assets and their companies. So space digital assets to us is such things as satellite data, imagery, software, intellectual property. Our main focus is on providing companies or even projects such as Harumi's or Sam's a capability to not just be able to show their company to a global market in a secure and controlled way, and even potentially gain financing that way directly for their project. I worked quite a bit around the token sales space for a while, so I understand those mechanisms and also the regulatory aspect. But more importantly, in the bigger picture, provide a marketplace and economic platform for what we call these digital assets and those companies, to where they can easily, in a much faster way, in a secure way as well, that follows whatever their security standards, anything the KYC standards or regulation standards, and allows them to commercialize their digital assets globally really fast at scale. And we purposely in the beginning aren't focusing around physical elements of the industry, which would be, your rocket parts, etc. But of course, it fits long term into what we do. So yeah, that was a quick overview.
So I know when I initially began to tell people that I am in the space business, outer space business. First of all, when I say space business, most of the people mistake it for the real estate space, right? Because when people hear the word space, that's the first thing that comes into mind. But when they realize that it actually means outer space, a lot of people ask me how you got into the business to begin with. So maybe for the people who are, to whom the outer space business is a really far out business, maybe we can kind of, tell everyone how it became, sort of like everyday business for all of us. Maybe perhaps that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, I could go into that a bit, and then maybe Grant can, and you can finish up for me. So, I mean, I got into the space business like somewhat accidentally in a way, due to just working on other related things and kind of trying to be an inventor and being an entrepreneur. Originally, I was focused around solar and battery technology in particular, as well as a tidal-powered water desalinator device that never happened. But the point is kind of getting into technology development and business and like running your own organization. I find a lot, or kind of being a director or executive, helps you get to a place where you can have the kind of conversations that you're like relevant to have in relation to space, either with a space agency or with another space company, or generally, some type of business interaction. I suppose like with sales, if you're doing space sales, you can get into that, but like it kind of takes some type of idea or invention or like research and development, either in software or hardware. I feel, or being a scientist, to kind of veer into that. There's a lot of other areas that people don't think about too, like space marketing. Like when you say, like sometimes we have some space marketing collaborations, and you're like, what is that? Like space marketing? And that's, a thing. And there's other ways of these like non-scientific, non-engineering, like non-technical sides of space and like space business. And it's kind of through different other projects that I end up getting introduced into different space work. So I find that you kind of have to like do something interesting for people to take note of what you're up to, and then kind of like invite you into it in a way. Like I've found space to be very invitational. Like it's due to a lot of networking and connections where you have a friend or get introduced to somebody who knows somebody, and then they have like this opportunity where they are like, hey, because I trust you and know you, there's this space mission happening, or there's this, you know, opportunity for you to submit some type of application or bid into something, and then it's just a matter of kind of ensuring that you get an actual contract happening to like really be able to do work in it and not have it just be like a hobby. Although you can do space as well with it just being a hobby too. Like some people manage to launch CubeSats into space with just being like a hobbyist, and they design their own little 1U thing, fun, or they, you know, work on it with a school or something. So there's like a lot of ways that you can get into space. It just depends how seriously you want to take it. Like, do you want it to be your life about rescheduling and aggregating different launch manifests and payload capacities between things, or do you want to just kind of have your own project and like, I want to build a satellite? Or is it like, you know, I'm going to launch a whole telecom company around trying to do this, and then how do you make that happen, or offer some type of remote chemical like sensing service from space, or some of the stuff we've been up to with blockchain is like data related, of course, like data assurance or like space related assurances for data, other monitoring or communications. So yeah, I've just found that kind of if you like go for being an entrepreneur or inventor and have an interest in space, you can get into it, or from this kind of like other angle of like art and branding and kind of like marketing side of it, where you're, you know, trying to involve certain brands as being associated with space. Like a great example is DHL, they're a shipping company, right? And they have been working with Astrobotic, which is a lunar lander company, to like sponsor them and having logos on the lunar lander and whatever, because the space marketing idea there is, you know, if they can launch, be involved in sending something to the moon, then they can send a package to like somewhere. So I don't know. That's maybe I'll leave Grant to go into his explanation of how he got into space and some interesting things about that people might not think of in terms of space business.
Yeah, my relation with space is kind of familial. My grandfather was an officer and professor around aerospace, physics, and some elements of engineering. Actually, I have some cool books that he kind of wrote himself in storage. And my mother's kind of extended that legacy and gotten me passionate about it. But also, like, you know, the really cool thing about space is that it's one of the most universal kind of things. It's like you go up to someone and you're like, hey, you like music? And how many times they're like, nah, I don't like music. Or you go to someone, you like space? Nah, I don't like space. It's pretty much a universal, has a universal kind of attractiveness to it for mankind overall. But through some activities, like I said earlier, that I was already doing around space, there's a foundation called Lady Rocket Foundation that I'm a part of, that provides kind of education and entrepreneurship through technological and entertainment experiences around space for like kids and stuff like that. But overall, we're building this kind of ecosystem, and we realized that, hey, there's all these great companies, there's all this stuff happening. There's a almost 500 billion industry. It's a lot, big portion of the market is kind of more private companies growing as a percentage. The commercial transactions are a little bit more private, growing as a percentage. It's a high tech industry, but yet, from the basic digital B2B sense, there's no real marketplace for even kind of core industry players to interact and transact and do so securely, let alone the global market of not just space entities, which I think is the big thing about why I like using the term for what we do, which is space economy. as opposed to space industry is because, for example, like a use case that we're working on is twofold. I'll give you two kind of sides of the use case. One is agriculture, which I really like. So, for example, we're talking to some space and satellite related projects that, for example, provide satellite data to farming companies and government entities around weather patterns for agriculture, right? How do you create a digital marketplace to securely, properly transact, transfer data, rights, licenses, etc., on a global scale without having to revert to our traditional processes, which is, once again, the funny thing about kind of the space industry is that it is high tech, some of the smartest people in the world, truly, blow me out of the water in any sort of sense. Like, I'm not super technical, back, Sam, to what you were saying. I'm not a very super technical person in the sense, like, I don't code or I'm not an engineer. But to be able to, build a system that's providing not opportunities for them to do this on a global scale, a lot more scalable, but also address the other major factor, which I'm sure you guys could relate to in some manner, which is the funding apparatus and avenues for space-related companies is quite low, right? So even when it comes to these use cases that we have, another aspect for these companies or entities that we're doing these use cases with, unless they're major players, is like the other use cases around something we're building called Zuma app, which, you have all the fires in the West Coast, and it's pretty kind of an archaic actual approach to how to handle and use data to handle those fires, right? It's still very much just helicopter drone. It's not using the best capability of data technology and imagery. So you build use cases around that, but also provide those entities to be able to get not just financing from an equity sense, which is something, especially as the STO regulatory market cleared up, is going to be great, but also, give the American public the capability to support projects, because once again, there's just a universal excitement and liking of space. And our long-term vision, if this is of course kind of a pie in the sky in a little bit, because NASA, for example, relies on the U.S. government for its budget and getting all that approval. But if they had certain particular projects that they could open up in a secure and regulated manner to the United States public to allow them to help support and fund, I don't think $100 million is anything outside of reality. So that's kind of the big picture. How I got into the space industry is to kind of connect all the dots between entities I was interacting with, things that I was experiencing, things that I was doing, and use my experience from digital media, which is very similar systems can be used for it, to the ICO and token sale element, and put that into an AZ sort of solution for the industry, or, as I said, the economy.
Cool. And so for me, I also like Grant was just saying a couple minutes ago, I'm not a technical person per se at all. I started out my career as an investment banker, and I went into fintech, but also as the business management person. So, I studied business at college. I have an MBA degree. Why did I get into space? It's because when people think about the space business, typically it's something hardware related. I think the words like rockets and satellites were already mentioned a few times throughout our introductory part of this conversation. And that's also how I kind of saw the space business. People take the rockets to go to the moon, and then maybe now we'll go to the Mars and whatever it is. But I realized, as when I met with my current business partner of Celestial Data, one thing that I realized is that there's tons of data that we don't think about. that is produced out there every day. And then there are some data, the imageries and hard data, whatever it is, that can actually help us to advance science on the Earth. But how do we actually connect that? Because most of the people don't have a way of directly harvesting what is coming out of the space unless you have a direct relationship with satellite or something like that. So, to just to give you an example, I think a lot of you have heard of a drug called Tamiflu. Actually, it was almost sort of like an accidental thing out in the microgravity environment. They actually found a weak string of a particular flu virus while they were experimenting something. The NASA brought it down to the Earth, gave it to the biotech company, and comes out the drug that we now call Tamiflu. I obviously very much oversimplify the process of how it was discovered, but if you think about on average minimum, the drug discovery process takes $1 billion per drug, and not all of the drugs actually come out of the pipeline at the end of the discovery process. If you think about what kind of data we can harvest out of the space, that is something that we definitely should be able, we should definitely find a way to leverage. And then also, even closer to us, for example, like firefighter suit that really endures the heat of the fire, that actually came from the fact that the rocket makers, NASA, all those people who get involved in the rocket manufacturing, they needed the metal, or they needed the material that can actually endure the heat of the initial sort of the explosion when the rocket actually takes off. And that material is actually leveraged to make the firefighter's suit. And the freeze-dry food, again, the astronauts wanted to have some food other than the little tablets that I think they used to live on, and comes out the freeze-dry food. So there are a lot of things that came out of the space business, sometimes from the discovery in the microgravity area, sometimes from the necessity of researching something, investigating something for certain specific products, and outcome the sort of like a byproduct of a lot of things that we actually don't even think that the space was involved. So, when people think about why do you care about the space business, there's so many problems to be solved on the Earth. Why do you have to look into the space business before we solve all these problems? There are actually a lot of problems that we can solve because we involve space into our daily lives. And that's one of the things that Celestial Data is trying to solve. So with that, Grant, maybe you have another question that you might want to ask us next.
I can't. I mean, it's kind of self-serving in a way, because people, someone wrote down there around asteroids, for example, which comes back to a physical element. You were talking about, for example, data that is generated that then needs to be analyzed or transformed in some way or applied in some way for it to have that like actual end usage, which comes back to kind of something that I've been really focused on, and I've had these same conversations with Sam before around this sort of stuff, which is, okay, so where's the connection point for, let's say, the company who's going to say, hey, listen, we see a need in a market to apply this data this way, right? If we transform it and present it in this way. So we need to acquire this type of data. This type of data is generated by these type of entities, which would be satellite, let's say, companies, right? And then there needs to be a commercial mechanism before it really even gets to, let's say it even ends to the C consumer, like what I was talking about earlier, what it could be with an application that helps in like fires, or agriculture could help a small farmer. Do small farmers even exist anymore? I don't know. But the question is around it is, how do you see this industry kind of moving into the next era to where those connections are made, just like, you know, in a very simple use case, and hopefully the experience that I can help bring over time, which is a very kind of ease of use experience, but secure, like even what eBay did for global, for example of global commerce between entities. How's the space industry going to kind of scale up in a certain sense, in your guys' mind?
Yeah, so I actually do. I mean, yeah, people don't know about the space. We already, I think, established that. And how do we bring it in the form that people can use it? I think the important thing is, right, I mean, we don't go from some known complete like sort of like known to complete unknown in one jump. For example, like in my case, we are just talking about distribution of data, and there are a lot of mechanisms here on the earth to actually be able to distribute. You know, we talk about fintech, medtech, right, health tech, all these like XXX tech things all day long, and there are a lot of like different delivery mechanisms that people are already familiar with, the business models that people are already familiar with, subscription. So when indeed I talk about celestial data business model, and because I live in New York, a lot of people are involved in some kind of variation of finance, right? So what I always say is, imagine Bloomberg for finance people. Think of a technology for the science people. I almost kind of like put it, so Bloomberg for science people. Then people say, I get it. Right, then the question actually goes to, then what kind of data can I actually bring into this Bloomberg for Science products, and then the conversation really starts. So I definitely do think that a part of it is education, because people do need to be educated that the space has this data, or this kind of things can be brought down from space to the earth, however that works. But also, in addition to that, slotting that into the language or the format that people understand, to help it easy for them to utilize, understand, envision. That's, I think, somewhat on us to deliver that mechanism, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I mean, I think there's been kind of this word called new space that I want to bring up at this point because of Grant's question about like where do you think the space industry is going. So there's kind of been this like bifurcation that has happened of like old space and new space. Old space is like, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, like a United Launch Alliance launch of an Atlas, some number vehicle, and hundreds of millions of dollars per launch instead of tens of millions, kind of thing. And so, like, I mean, SpaceX is like on the verge. Like, I think they count as new space, but they've been around for like a while. I mean, like Firefly counts as new space for sure, or like a lot of these European companies like Exolaunch or other like Astrobotic, Lunar Lander Company, Intuitive Machines, Lunar Lander Company, like Space IL, they're Israeli company. So there's kind of like these newcomers who are disrupting space and making it accessible and cheaper, and kind of innovating around not just like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the kind of standard Rockwell related hardware crew and so on. Like, those guys are great and all, and we definitely need them to continue doing a lot of things, especially like classified projects and programs that maybe some of these new space companies don't have the security or experience to handle that kind of thing. So like a lot of US government agency work would probably continue to go down that path and not be involved with new space. But sometimes maybe based on the new space companies getting more experience, they can get involved into that kind of thing, or just do like unclassified work. So I mean, that's like a really interesting kind of thing going on, where there's this explosion of new companies and startups who are trying to monetize new opportunities, not necessarily displace incumbent people. Like, it's not like these new space companies are going to go get the Boeing contract away from Boeing and it's going to be them now. It's like that doesn't happen, but there's just all of these new opportunities and new things where they can try to monetize the cislunar economy, it's called, which is like the moon economy. So there's going to be a marketplace for data and energy and services on the moon. And so the cislunar economy will be about, I want to buy certain power, or can I have like uplink or downlink to Earth with my moon base, communication equipment or whatever. And there will be, and there already are companies for vying for that. Like, I want to be this company, the cislunar industry, like we will try to provide comms, or we'll try to provide power, or we'll try to provide, habitats, or different, like there's some really interesting new space Japanese companies around lunar habitats. And there's just a lot of interesting stuff going on with kind of new opportunities that are also either too risky or exotic for these big incumbent old space companies to want to go after. Like McDonnell Douglas is not going to go after that, or like a lot of companies saw also what happened with Bigelow Aerospace and them going bankrupt, and they worked on space habitats and also a lot of interesting UAP research. And so people are like, well, maybe that's not the most monetizable thing. So we'll see what To the Stars Academy does with that. I hope they do well. But yeah, so I'm gonna maybe just pass it off to someone else.
I have two kind of related points to that, and maybe a question. I'll start off with the aspect that what you talked about, that division between new and old, and Northrop Grumman, et cetera, incumbents handling these bigger, let's say more sensitive, more related towards government contracts and related aspects data. I actually had end of last year had a cool experience where I got to go to SpaceX, and Branstein and Musk were talking about the launch that they were going to do, the one with the the first American astronauts launched from an American spaceship, and I forgot how many years at this point, 20 or something. And I actually asked, and they're talking about their collaboration and everything, considering everything that's going on, the competition, that's existing between just starting to brew even more with other countries, how are you guys dealing with, transfer of IP? What do you guys want to do with that IP later? Are elements of it going to be public, etc.? Elon's, kind of seemed to get a little kind of like not flustered with it, but just kind of like, okay, I'm going to just give a stern answer, which was all SpaceX IP is going to be public, which was a really big statement to make in my mind, to say that we're going to make all our space technology, intellectual property stuff that we're collaborating with the U.S. government public. Of course, Brandon and NASA had a much more kind of pragmatic response than that, but it showed something that's interesting to me, which like I talked about the long goals that I have, which is, for example, NASA does have these kind of programs around using certain intellectual property technologies they have, but this long-term kind of question of, okay, how are these entities really going to handle this if they really want to in any sort of scalable, easily transferable, usable manner that once again doesn't come back to like a 1950 style of bureaucracy and paperwork and doing this and transferring rights and licenses, etc. My question to you, as you said, I forgot the company you brought up. It was doing habitat, some sort of habitat aspect, right? You said that bankrupt, Sam, and you said something important, which is, Yeah, well, maybe then it seemed people thought, well, maybe this isn't a viable business model. And before that, you mentioned a bunch of, you're saying a bunch of companies, they're fighting for space in this space already. And even while you're saying that, which was before it got to the next part, I said, I thought in my head that, yeah, doesn't sound very viable for a company right now, unless their pockets are just infinitely deep, because not only are those extremely, extremely expensive projects, but they seem quite far away still in a chronological end. So my question is how much, and another reason why we don't focus so much on physical aspects but more digital aspects is like how much of this very futuristic tokenizing, asteroid mining, etc. type of stuff, how much of that is a viable business or endeavor at this moment?
Yeah, so I mean, like, I want to mention pretty much like the orders of magnitude of doing space business, I guess, to explain that first, because then that explains what levels you can be at essentially. So like, and it is based around money. You really have to have money to play ball. Like, you gotta have some 6-digit amount of money in the bank account to like wire, to have anyone care about, like, what you have going on for generally a launch services arrangement or satellite project with respect to you know even a rideshare program. You want to do a small CubeSat or something, you have to be able to like cough up money for equipment and for a team to do it all, and testing and assurances and so on, to launch something into space. And like, there's like that level of a project where you're kind of have some hundreds of thousands or maybe a million or two to kind of like do like a satellite or a group of satellites or CubeSat rideshare scenario, where there is a primary payload that is some big satellite that's for the US government or something, or a telecommunications company. And then you can kind of rideshare on that. And so there's this whole sort of secondary business around payload rideshare slots, and that is like kind of tangible to get into, either as a buyer or reseller or somebody who has a project to get on those, or get into a situation where you can do a deal with somebody who has been doing that, and kind of doing business around capacity of a certain amount of mass to orbit that you buy, and then you can either use it yourself or try to resell it to other people. So there's kind of this, like, that part of the space business, or even smaller than that, like, less than $100,000 to do like different consulting projects, or kind of things where maybe you do marketing work or some type of small hardware fabrication piece where you are just selling some subsystem to somebody else who actually integrates it into a project, and you're not responsible for anything other than fabricating this aluminum plate with some holes in it, and that's all you do. So there's like ways of being minimally involved where you, either from a data perspective or marketing perspective or software and hardware perspective, you're just doing some little teeny sub piece of things. And a lot of people get into the space industry through that, where they just like get sub delegated some little task to do a fabrication job or software or hardware piece of something, and then they get roped into more. So, or you're doing like, bigger space business where it's a dedicated launch, and there's tens of millions of dollars involved to have the whole rocket associated with what you're doing, and then you're selling that to some big company where that's the primary payload, and like that's your deal. You're not in the secondary rideshare business, you're in like the dedicated launch business. And so in terms of like space financing for all those scenarios, it just depends where you're at. Like, the best way to do space business or have it happen is just make revenue. Don't try to go out and get financing, or spend all your time raising equity or trying to get debt deals. Like, just get someone to pay you for what you have, which is your access to information or opportunity or data or whatever it is. Like, I have this launch spot, I have this data stream, I have access to, these satellites or these people or this ground communications network or other auxiliary kind of secondary or tertiary factors about like space data or yeah, I don't know. It's the point is I'm saying there's these different tiers of getting involved in stuff. Like, you have less than $100,000, you're like involved in some little subsystem or whatever. Or if you get like, hundreds of thousands to $1 million, you can do like an actual satellite project, or millions for like, many of those, and getting up to tens of millions for like entire launches. And so in terms of financing that, it's like a different thing. You can like pull together money as a hobbyist to do some small project, or you just need to get sales from a company where they're wiring your company money for what you have to offer them, which is like, maybe some CubeSat spot, or you bought space from SpaceX or Firefly and now you want to sell it. Like, I'm saying these because these are things that I do also like tangibly for my space business work. So, yeah, maybe Harumi can go.
All right. So, yeah, one of the things that I first noticed is because I actually do work with a lot of small business people, not just space, but variations of people in my consulting sort of capacity. One thing that I noticed is that, okay, so if you're doing something in STEM, there are a lot of different kind of grants, so that you can go look for them if you have the patience to actually write the grant paper. But past that, if you look at the small business, like grant or some kind of like money that you can find through NASA or any kind of like space program, I think the space business still assumes a lot of different types of hardware rather than software. So even for the like sort of first stage granting, it actually, Celestial Data is very much a software company, right? So I look at the number and say, if I win one of those, it actually will finance us for a long time. So those are kind of things that you definitely want to take advantage of, especially if you're in the sort of like an unexpected field of a given sort of industry, such as like space, which still assumes most of the businesses to be dealing with some kind of hardware. I do agree with Sam though that you do have to have like your own income stream of some kind. You cannot just rely on other people's money. So you do, I think it's becoming more and more true with any kind of running a small business. And when you talk about incubator program or, some kind of programs like that, if you go there and then look at the requirements that they have to be a part of the program, and then it says, we are looking for early stage startup company, and then we will grant you this kind of money if you come on the program. And then you think that, early stage, the definition of early stage is really beginning to change. This is not just for space. Generally speaking, in a small business, space business ownership world, it is slightly different though around the world. We happen to be in the US, where this sort of venture capital industry is probably a little bit more advanced, for lack of better words, than some other places. So I know a company that is very big and in the space business, waste management, the space waste management business, and they went around raising money for the later stage funding. And they said that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't actually raise the money in the US. So they actually raised the money, most of their money in Japan and some from Europe. So how do we fund it? Where do we get the money? You have to be kind of smart, and you have to know where to go, and you have to know what you can get from which program or things like that. So that's really sort of my 2 cents when it comes to the funding of a small business startup. But I do agree, Sam, that you really kind of want to get to some kind of revenue generation stage very early to be taken seriously nowadays.
So
yeah, to jump in on that as well.
That question originally, Sam, was most of those companies don't have a viable model at this point. What revenue are they going to generate for the next X years? According to
so
their
like
target.
to follow up on like to follow up on that point, like a lot of stuff like, you know, asteroid mining or just like, you know, land titles in space or certain things like that haven't ever been monetized at all yet are, like, in my opinion, very far away, like, you know, at least 5 to 10 years kind of thing, in my opinion, in terms of like monetization of asteroid mining. Like, you know, as we saw from Planetary Resources, that was an asteroid mining company that got acquired by Consensus, and now they have kind of pivoted to being like, JK on the asteroid mining, let's do that in 10 years. For now, though, let's focus on like space data, blockchain, space stuff. So like they kind of have that be like Consensus's space software lab type thing now, and as far as I see it. I hope they keep some space operations and space mission design planning and things going, but like, I don't know, after a while when you are doing these really long-term mission planning matters, you kind of have to like, just like, I don't know, either have like the billionaire sugar daddy there to cut the next check, or like give up and or come up with like a sustainable space business thing you have ongoing, and then like you refunnel that into your longer term cooler thing. And that's what like a lot of the sustainable space startups have been able to do, or just somehow due to financial connections, really good business plan, documentation, entrepreneurial past, and networks and team, like, you know, pull together that, you know, big $100 million equity raise to be legitimate or whatever. Like some of these new space startups that are actually doing launch services and you know, making it happen. Like, I don't know, Firefly and Rocket Lab and Electron and whoever else are actually, you know, getting to the point where it's more than a science experiment. So a lot of the kind of propulsion launch services side of things start out really as like well-funded science experiments that try to actually make it to something. And there are a lot of bankruptcies that happen in the space business, but you know, if you make it and are able to somehow juggle the kind of revenue and debt and equity that you need to make it happen, it's possible. But like, there's sort of, I don't know, there's like two types of projects pretty much. There's like ones that I mean, it sounds stupid, but there's ones that happen and there's ones that don't. Like, and the ones that happen are because they're very realistically lined up with like a launch manifest and a need, and that whole part of it has to be financed enough. So you either have someone else paying for that all, or it's you. So like, that's how a lot of this rideshare business cropped up, is because people wanted to piggyback on these big US government satellites or other satellites and other, you know, big payloads that they can then put their little dream on and try to help make that happen. And so a lot of space businesses are cramming on their CubeSats onto these rideshare things to be like, see, I can demo that my thing works. Or like, you know, my camera or comm system or whatever, like, you know, see, it was in space, it works. Now I can justify that this could be maybe one day its own big primary payload, or we launch a constellation of those things, like how SpaceX is actually doing that with the Starlink constellation of satellites. So
it sounds like they'll need to fundraise a bunch of money based off that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, you generally need to have a lot of money somehow. It doesn't have to be raised. Like, I would recommend that you try to just make a lot of revenue and then direct the revenue into space business matters, whether you're making money off of whatever you're on.
Yeah, but my thing to that is like, I'm a startup guy, right? In the model of what would be considered like modern startup, right? And sorry, like, for a company to especially on a higher end of a tech sort of end company, for it to not raise minimum hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars.
Yeah, like, I assume you're going to raise thousands, you know, regardless. I was just like,
yeah, but that's the biggest loophole in the market. That's the biggest hole in the market, right? And that's why, you know, I keep talking about the financing aspect and kind of opening that up is because I'll ask people in the industry, right? People that have these satellite companies that you're talking about, right? Where they'll send out, some little satellites, they're generating some data. They might have a few customers that they're selling select data to on a very kind of traditional sort of business end. But the financing avenues for these companies seem to be really, really limited. And it's either super high end. You got a couple VCs, a couple big kind of investors that will put in the tens of millions, et cetera, which is mainly, towards shooting a rocket into space, et cetera. And then there might be a few angels that are passionate in the space. But I just see a really big loophole when it comes to, like entrepreneurs getting into the space and being able to fundraise a few $100,000, a couple million to take them into, a reasonable market presence of some sort. And that's, continuously why, the coolest thing, one of the, obviously the biggest, most successful use cases that has happened around blockchain technology and crypto, like true use cases to where it's been used in any sort of scalable manner, is people providing funds for something back, in a direct and secure manner. So, that's kind of the thing that I'm trying to address. And I'm Sam and Harumi, I'm sure both of you have struggled in that sort of beginning middle ground around this industry and what you're trying to do.
I don't think it's just us. I think probably all of the startup companies do struggle, right? I mean, sometimes you get lucky and then like some referred to as sugar daddy, you might be able to find somebody who pay for a dream. And this is just pocket change, so take it. But in most cases, you have to be lucky and to actually bump into the right investors. But first, what you should be able to do from your end is really the space business is not special in a sense that it still has to solve somebody's problem. I mean, it might be that making somebody's dream come true, but you still have to solve somebody's problem. So as a business owner, what you need to be always asking is, whose problem am I solving? Am I hoping to solve some problem by coming up with this new something, or this actually fits into some place whose big problem, and hopefully there are a lot of people, a lot of companies out there whose problem I can solve, so I can actually go there, zero in, and market this, so that there are like venture capitalists, or big venture capitalists or angels who are passionate, as you said, Grant. They actually will give their money to you. That's like, that's the foundation of any business owner that I think we have to do. And then the relentless marketing, I guess, plus maybe a little bit of luck to actually get the funding. We don't want to leave everything to luck. So you have to do everything that you can do, which is, again, going back to whose problem am I solving? Am I solving actual problem that exists out there? Or I'm just building something for the fallacy of build so somebody will come. And
well, that's the blockchain.
Yeah,
that's the blockchain approach for the most part. Going back to the token sale thing is, I'm gonna build an idea that sounds great and utopian, but what's the real usage? What's the real function? The real market towards that, and there is. I'm wondering whether there's going to be that around the funding aspect, whether you're going to see soon. Just like, Anna brought up, she commented earlier, I saw around the cannabis industry. So are we going to see this sort of thing where you're going to see VCs and kind of these earlier middle ground stage investors come into the space industry, what Sam called new space, and they're just going to go in based off hype and taglines, right? Just like, mining asteroids sounds awesome, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to be, the guy who invested in the first company that mined an asteroid and successfully did it around something? But The bigger point is I'm wondering whether this new space industry will eventually get to a point where people throwing money at things that don't really have that. Back to my original question to Sam, which is, hey, how many of these ideas and these companies that are trying, and you mentioned the Consensus acquired one that they pivoted at totally and absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm saying any company that's talking about successfully having a functional company in the next 5 to 10 years, talking about asteroid mining is not a reality.
The moon is more tangible though. Like Mars business stuff is too far out, in my opinion, generally, unless you're like Elon mode or asteroid mining stuff. But I just wanted to point out that the moon is not like too far away, because we are actually starting to send stuff there rather soon here. Like it's going to be a year or two. We're setting up various uncrewed launches, and then there's
but where's the business
crewed mission in 2024.
Like from an R&D sense and that stuff. But where's the business in that?
No, I mean like there's a lot going on in those launches. So I mean, whether or not there's a lunar lander involved or just like TLI, translunar injection orbit, which is lunar orbit, injections. So there's not only people launching to Earth orbit, various telecom equipment and cameras and whatever. There's like this whole new market of like, instead of launching to just Earth orbit, and the question being like, is it GTO or MEO or LEO? It's, or do you want to go to a lunar orbit? And then that's another pricing and scheme of scenarios where people are doing entire things to support that for, instead of geospatial intelligence, there's lunar spatial intelligence. And, instead of different versions of Earth-based observation, it's lunar-based observation or communication or power or services. So like there really is a legitimate thing you can participate in now in terms of lunar business for launch services, reselling, payload capacity. There's current pricing of like $1 per kilogram landed to the moon, and like people know what that is. It's like around $1 million. So or like 1.1 or 1 million.
Where's the business in it, which you kind of answered, which still seems like years away.
No, I mean, you can do it right now. Like the book's up now. Like their launch, I missed one of the launches being on it for the first moon mission because I didn't like wire Astrobotic in time. Like it could be like a year or 2 or 3 years out, but the deadline's now, or the deadline's in 3 months for 2 years away.
The deadline, so there's the deadline for what?
Exactly. Like for paying somebody to be a part of the mission, or allocating a down payment that you're on it, or buying hardware, the lead time is like a year for this part, or is like it takes a while to get in the position for being able to do it.
I get it, but remember we came out of asteroid mining. So my thing is not, yes, there's already a market, which I understand.
I'm just saying moon business is happening now. Like, that's all. Okay. Even though it's not launching now, the moon business is happening now. You know what I mean? So there's like this lag of the money and everything transacts years before it is going to actually happen. So it's going to 2023 of launches and stuff. Those deals are happening now. So I'm just saying, like, even space startups can participate in that. You can make a space startup right now where you do moon payload space brokering. You can do that now with no investor, accept money for doing the deal, and just like fucking pull it off somehow.
My bigger point is that the resource is supposed to come from either the moon itself or something you place on the moon that provides you, for example, better data than you would have otherwise. And like for now, like it seems like, hey, the business model is I'm going to hitch a ride.
Yeah, I mean, to get into it, generally, it's about ride share spots and services and buying and trying to get in line so that you can resell to somebody else later because your timing's better or you're on the particular launch. And how much capacity do you have?
That's an interesting niche industry. It's an interesting niche industry, to be honest. And that's the thing, is there like an open marketplace for that?
No. So it's like, I mean, there is no open marketplace where I can be like, I go post that I have 630 kilograms of Firefly space, like, or that I have 200 kilograms.
Do you see value in that?
I mean,
Would you see value in
potentially,
that kind of being a more open thing?
I would see value in it if it is like a consortium approach, kind of like vetted parties. Like you pitch to the group of
Right, right.
300 space companies, whatever, where you make sure there's not security problems of that I am pitching to North Korea or China or Iran or Russia that I'm gonna offer them space services. Like I can't do that. That would be bad. And similarly for people in those countries, to me, that would be bad. Like, there's just a geopolitical
No,
bifurcation to keep in
I
mind in
got you.
terms of
And thank you for that. By
open
the way,
market.
I'm glad I prodded you on that, because you just kind of gave me some inspiration. So I'm glad I was questioning you toughly on that one.
Anyways, I think maybe we wrap up soon. Harumi, did you have any last comments to make about any of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have been talking about the funding for quite a while. That look, I think space business. I mean, I'm not gonna steal like some movies line or anything, but it's definitely the last frontier that we can see right now. And I do think that the participant is still very small. And I mean, this venue is to talk about the space business kind of crossed with the blockchain, and both of which are still in its lack of better words, infancy, or they both have a very small market share in terms of like real business economics. So I think that there are still a lot of space, and no pun intended, for people to come and participate if you have a great idea, and would love to see a lot of you on the other side to participate in the business one way or another. So that's if you want to be a part of this, I'm really looking forward to meeting you all.
Sam, you want a conclusion from your end?
Yeah, sure. So thanks everyone for listening, and I hope it was kind of useful or informative to hear about some tangible things in the space business, like various companies or practical matters in terms of getting involved in this, or seeing what tier of level you're trying to kind of get involved in. But yeah, I think fundraising is an important thing. Entrepreneurialism is an important thing, and that there's a lot of future space missions to happen, and that you can get involved in them. And you have to get involved in them well in advance. So you can just generally write off anything that is not more than a year in advance as something that's kind of like too soon. So in terms of planning things, generally right now it's like 2021, 2022 out further. And yeah, it's just make a space company and try to get wired money for doing something that is like, a non-fraudulent space offering of something. Start out with space marketing to make it easy, and then you can start doing like maybe news and PR or whatever, and then get into like an actual space deal maybe. But yeah, like look into Celsius Network and Copernic Space and my company, Geometric Energy. Hopefully we can collaborate with you guys.
I guess I'll end it off. Last kind of, I guess, words towards this is, I'm happy, of course, and thank you, Harumi and Sam. I think Sam got off. I think the end goal that a lot of us have and want to show, and what Sam was just talking about, is that, just like the kind of the unique experience I had entering the crypto industry is, even though space is kind of this far out and, in some senses an old industry, it still has a very unique opportunity in this new era, this more digital era, for people to get involved who don't have to be a engineer. They don't have to be from that super high tech or engineering end around the space industry to interact with it in some manner. Whether that is, what we're trying to do long term, from the end of giving the American public or the average person the capability to even eventually own a part of one of these innovative up and coming space companies, which is usually reserved for, a very elite segment of investors in society, all the way to, you know, giving a startup. I'm in Warsaw right now, giving one of these great startups with technical minds here who are doing satellite data and imagery, you know, some sort of marketplace to gain a global presence and better gain revenue, commercialize their aspect, all the way to potentially providing, you know, like an open marketplace to, you know, highly vetted but open marketplace for people to buy, you know, place on a rocket that's going to the moon. So these are, you know, as we saw in the blockchain space, same sort of similar kind of aspects. What blockchain did to finance, you might even see similar sort of aspects applied to the space industry. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Blockchain Center.